So last time we left off, we were in the middle of period 3, and we had talked about the Inca and Aztecs. I think I was a little bit minimal with the Inca and Aztecs. From looking at the key concepts, to see which page it was. So it's page right here where it's concept 3.2 for those who were in here last time. Part D, the Aztecs and the Incas. The point on the key concept actually mentions the Maya, the Aztecs, and the Inca. So I just wanted to kind of go over that a little bit better. If we look at the map right here, we have Mesoamerica, which is Mexico and Central America, and South America. The main civilization areas, particularly in South America, the Andes Mountains, right? We talked about last time. You guys are my reference point for if I'm going too repetitive from last time, because as I said, you're going to do there's a lot of overlap in this topic, right? Just because there's so much in period 3, so many concepts, so many ideas, so many things like kind of emerging there in this period. The key concepts tend to jump back and forth between topics. So Aztecs, Incas, you can even add Maya. Maybe you want to put them on the white space on the left side if you don't have another place to talk about the Maya. But specifically, it's talking about the networks of city-states that flourish the imperial system. So we'll try to focus just on the governmental side of things. So the Maya were in this region of southern Mexico, northern Central America. They're early period 3, so even going into the classical age, but kind of going up until 900 CE. So I'm a little surprised that they talk about them here. I think we did talk about them a bit in period 2. So they kind of bridged the classical and the post-classical, which is of course an old world, primarily European construct. The key things to keep in mind is that there's not a Maya empire, right? The Maya people were not an empire. They were very similar to the Sumerians or the ancient Greeks, where they were a group of city-states. And each city, each region around it was independent from each other. We were just talking about this in your class, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're independent from each other, but they share the same culture, they share the same language, they share the same similar religious beliefs. So it's all one culture, all one civilization, but politically distinct from each other. I'm trying to go too far into beyond that. There's a lot of, in the Americas, there's a lot of, even going back to the classical or even the ancient period, there's a lot of social hierarchy, because in addition to being an agricultural society where you always have social hierarchy, right? Particularly in the Americas, it's challenging because they don't have. What do the Americas lack that Afro-Eurasia, particularly Eurasia, has?
In terms of
anything like resources, in terms of geographically, environmentally.
We had certain animals, like for example, like they had camels, like specific animals that can cross like the desert, but they only had alpacas in South America.
Yeah,
so we're very good at.
What else does Afro-Eurasia have besides camels? Animal-wise, they have camels. They have other important animals. Horses, cows, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, all this stuff, right? The Americans have none of that. So they do have domesticated dogs. They have turkey. But in terms of labor animals, real labor animals, the only beasts of burden that they have are the llamas and alpacas, like you said, and that's only in the Andes. So the rest of all of the Americas lacks animals that can do work for them. So what's the primary labor animal in the Americas? In the whole Americas? What is it?
Humans?
Yeah, us. Right? We are our own labor animal. And they don't have wheeled vehicles. So if you're dragging something, right, if you're carrying something, even if it's people, you think, okay, at least they can roll it. Nope, no wheels. No wheeled vehicles. So things have to be lifted, right? When you see pictures of I'll show you in a minute, I guess, when we look at pictures of like the Inca emperor being carried, he's being carried by people and he's being carried on a platform, not being carried on a wheeled cart or anything like that, a coach or anything like that. So when we look at the Aztecs and the Inca, I think that's really important to keep in mind. Also, other than, we said, the Andes Mountains are the only places they had any kind of labor animal. Mesoamerica is the only place they had any kind of writing. Do you guys remember what they had in the Inca? The strings, right? Do you remember what those called? It wasn't really writing, but it was a system of recording information, limited.
I remember they used to like tie the strings with the knots. I forgot what it was called.
Anybody? Maybe my freshman back there. Do you remember what it was called that the Inca used to tie knots in the string, record information? Quipu. Q-U-I-P-U. Q-U-I-P-U. Excuse me. But the key thing is, because of those limitations, then you're gonna have, if you're gonna make an empire, if you're gonna make a big, robust empire, the kind of things that we've seen in Afro-Eurasia, you're gonna have to really have a well-organized, well-oiled, and very, very structured system of government and system of labor within that government in order to make things function, right? It's gonna be even harder. So we're not going to get into the advances of the Maya because I think we've spoken about that in the past. But let's look at the Aztecs and the Incas. So the Aztecs, right? We talked about Chinampas last time.
Yeah, a little bit.
So we don't have to get into that for this part, but we're focusing primarily on the government system, right? They have the city, right, Tenochtitlan. The way that they organize things, they have systems of tribute, right? Where the people had to pay the government. Similar to taxes, right, but not necessarily as organized, but they were really high levels of tribute, and they were very strict, right? Both empires were strict in their own way. They had human sacrifice, right, which was a religious part of it, but there's also a political element to that if you think about it, right? That by taking the conquered peoples and them being the offerings as human sacrifices, that kind of puts a fear into them, right? That this is the authority, they're the ones who we have to listen to, and they have the power of life and death over us. And there is slavery in the Aztec Empire, right? You can assume that in many places, any really elaborate civilizations in the Americas, there's usually slavery. We'll talk about the Inca because they have a little different system there. But this was a system that they had there to control the empire. They made an alliance with other Mesoamerican peoples and kind of united it together and dominated that. In the case of the Inca, the ruler is an absolute ruler, right? He has total power. It's almost like communism. Did we talk about this last time? The centrally planned economy of the Inca.
Not really. No.
Not really. Okay, we talked about the Mita system a little bit. We talked about corvée labor.
Yeah.
Right? So, did we talk about it in the context of the Inca or not?
Well, I think a little bit. We started talking about it.
So, the ruler is absolute ruler. We talked in period 2 about, I think that was the part that didn't get recorded, but the methods of consolidating her empire, right? That we saw from the Persians to the Romans to the Qin, the Han, the ways that they would make sure that people followed things, right? Some of the more harsh things like cultural uniformity, right? We saw that under the Qin. We saw that not enforced by the Romans, but encouraged through Romanization. That's definitely something we see in the Inca Empire. I ask my students sometimes, right? We have a lot of students that come from South America, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, right? And I'll say like, oh, anybody's family speak Quechua, right? Anybody's family speak Quechua? No, this one. Something new. But in my class the other day, we had several people who, oh yeah, my aunt speaks Quechua, my grandma speaks Quechua. Which for one is like really cool that you have people who, and one of the amazing things about being in Queens, right, is we have like all these different cultures. But one of the reasons why, maybe the negative side of that, one of the reasons why Quechua is still so widely spoken in South America, despite the Spanish having imposed their language, is because before the Spanish imposed their language, the Inca imposed their language, right, throughout their empire, and that was the main language that was spread and imposed on the people. The religion of the Inca became the dominant religion in the region, right? So they wanted that cultural uniformity. And here, see, there you go, right? The human animal as the labor system for people. Of course, that's not unique to the Americas. We had, slavery and human labor throughout Afro-Eurasia as well, but it's particularly necessary here where you don't have access to the animals to help you or to take some of the burden off. So the centrally planned economy. So some similarities with some things we even talked about Stalinist Russia, where they had farmers were told how much you have to grow. So it reminds us of that collectivization, right? It's not to the point of being collectivized, but there's a certain requirement that you have to meet. The food is taken by the government, is redistributed out to the people, and every adult male is required to serve in both as physical labor, so it's the corvée labor, right, and military service, right, conscription. Those are two forms of coerced labor, right, non-free labor, and that was called the MITA system, MIT''A. So I think that covers the Aztecs. I wanted to Aztecs and Incas. I wanted to clear that up because we touched on it last time, but we didn't go very far. All right, so now we can really bust through this last part of 3.2 and then really go through all 3.3 today. If we do finish with a lot of time to spare, maybe we'll take like a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and do 4.1. So let's see. So the second part, the Roman numeral 2 says interregional contacts and conflicts between states and empires encourage significant technological and cultural transfers. So there's a lot of exchange happening back and forth between peoples, obviously, in the post-classical period, in period 3. There's a few that they specifically mention in the bullet points, and so we have them here on there as well. So there's a battle, actually, that's a significant turning point for the history of the Middle East and China, because we know that there are two big empires here during the post-classical age. In China, we have the Tang Dynasty, right? By the 700s, they've expanded beyond China, right? China is now out of that period of disunion, right? And they're expanding the Tang Dynasty into Central Asia, right? So they're going farther and farther and closer to what region of the world? What's like, if you keep going, what's that way?
Asia Minor.
Right, but not quite yet. This is still what's today Western China, Xinjiang province. You guys did the BBQ the other day on that, right?
Yeah.
About the Uyghurs and stuff?
Yeah.
So that's where they conquered to here. But if you keep going this way, what's there? Are you looking at the map? Huh? Not yet. Well, eventually, if you keep going, you'll hit Canada. But what's right next to it? I mean, look at. Yes, Central Asia and the Middle East, right? So this is still technically part of Central Asia. But you know, if you think about the modern countries, the next country over from China is like Kazakhstan, you know, and the other Turkic countries or Central Asian countries, right? Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, eventually Tajikistan. A lot of those Turkic or Iranic countries, and yeah, eventually the Middle East, right? The other big empire is the caliphates, right? We talked about the Umayyad Caliphate earlier in this period, and then the Abbasid Caliphate replaces them as the primary caliphate throughout the region. They're also expanding, right? The Umayyads and the Abbasids, and look where they're going, right? They're in the Middle East, they're in Mesopotamia, they take over Persia, and Khorasan is basically going into that Central Asian region, that place that has been, Bactria, Sogdiana, Transoxiana, these regions that, maybe don't strike a chord with us in terms of big empires, but they're important with trade and nomadic peoples. Silk Road, they're expanding this way. So where are they going to hit?
They're going to hit the Abbasid Empire.
So they are the Abbasid Empire. I'm saying, where does the Abbasid Empire think to be expanding this way?
They're going to keep.
Yeah, they're going to bump into each other, right? And that's exactly what happens. You have something called the Battle of Talas, Talas, in 751. It's not as famous as some of, in contemporary culture as some of the other battles that people have heard of, probably in a Eurocentric way. But this is a big one, and one of the cool things about it is it's that clash of, it's two civilizational regions that kind of bump into each other. And when that happens, there's going to be an exchange, right? So the most famous thing about this battle is not who wins or who loses, but it's the exchange that takes place. And one of the big exchanges that happened when the expanding this new Muslim state, right? This new Muslim Islamic civilization, right? Obviously, it's an extension of Persian and everything like that. But this new Islamic civilization comes into contact with China, and one of the most important and valuable things they get is paper. Paper is a game changer, right? We don't think we talk a lot about the printing press, right? We talk a lot about we talk a lot about the printing press and all these things, but you could never have the printing press if you didn't have paper. Right? What are you going to print on? You're going to print on a leaf? Stone, right? You just can't do it, right? When you go back to Mesopotamia, they used cuneiform writing because it worked for clay, right? You had those wedge shapes. It's not great for writing on paper. It's meant for clay. That's not the most convenient, effective way of keeping writing. In the Middle Ages, and in the Roman times, but particularly in the Middle Ages, before paper reached Europe, the thing they used as paper was parchment, right? Which is and vellum, which is a higher quality. It's made from animal skins, right? So that's not something that's easily accessible, cheap. You can't just make a bunch of that. You have to kill an animal every time you want to make paper. Paper is going to be hard to come by. During the early Islamic period, when they were writing down like the Quran and the Hadiths and all these religious texts, they didn't have access to abundant paper. They were writing on wood, they were writing on leaves, they were writing on skins and whatever parchment they did have access to. Writing wasn't a big thing at the time. So when paper comes in the 750s and starts making its way into the Islamic world, what is that going to make possible? What ends up happening in the
Islamic Golden Age?
Yeah. Islamic Golden Age. So all these things that we see from the Islamic Golden Age, in terms of, when you think about the Renaissance and the scientific Reformation, revolution, in Europe, the Protestant Reformation, all these religious, scientific, cultural changes. A big part of that is the printing press, right? Because they were able to transmit information more readily, more quickly, more easily, more cheaply. It wasn't like everyone just became smart. It was the fact that they could share knowledge. But this is kind of what happens in the Islamic world with paper. Suddenly you have access to paper. We have to handwrite everything, but at least we have something to write it on, and we can transmit knowledge. We can make copies. That's why there was so much of that translation and libraries being, assembled. It's because of paper. I promise I won't go this much into detail on the other one, but I just think this is such a big deal that sometimes gets missed. Wood pulp. You can do it with actual paper if you feel like they do. I think they do that in younger grades. They'll have kids rip up paper, soak it, turn it into the mush, and you put it on like a screen. You dry it, right? You press it into a sheet, and it dries. You leave it on a clothing line, and you can write on it. It's kind of crumbly, but it works. And that's essentially how paper is made, which is kind of more modern ways of doing it. But that's what they got from China. The Mongols, right? Huge empire, the largest contiguous land empire in all of history. They're going to spread a ton of culture. What's the period called as the Mongols?
Pax Mongolica.
What time is it? 3:10. So if you want to write on the back, I'll sign it. So you can write 2:45 to 3:10. You can write on the back 2:45 to 3:10. I'll sign it, and then I'll have you email to confirm. There you go. Hopefully that's sufficient. So the Mongols, what is this period called where the Mongols have conquered this entire region and there's trade and all this exchange going on within it?
Pax Mongolica.
Pax Mongolica, very good. So again, similar things, right? The exchange of not just paper, but printing technology, gunpowder technology. Those are probably the two biggest ones. But a lot of these things that China has developed, so many of the famous things, I forget who it was, maybe, I want to say Sir Francis Bacon. And he said, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the three he mentioned were the three greatest inventions that Europe has given us were gunpowder, the compass, and printing. And all of them were from China.
I think I used that in the debate.
Did you?
I'm pretty sure I did.
Maybe I might be swapping out one of the inventions for another. I'm pretty sure it was bacon though. But yeah, China has had such a huge influence on us, but on the world. Hello, are you here for a review?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Just grab that shorter stack. You can grab the spot in the back or wherever. Do you have the packet from last time?
No, I wasn't even here.
Okay, do you want the packet?
Sure.
Okay, it's right there. So you can show them, somebody else can show them around. So the Mongols, that's a huge one, right? Math, medicine, astronomy from the Middle East, geographic knowledge, gave them the most accurate maps in the world at the time. Of course, they didn't have the Americas yet, but other than that, pretty good. The Crusades. I don't know why they go in this particular order, because I think it would have made sense to talk about the Crusades before the Mongols. Maybe you could put a little arrow reminding you that the Crusades come first and the Mongols come second. Otherwise, it would have been in the correct order. It would have been perfect. That really bugs me. I hate when they do things out of order. the Crusades was a huge one, right? This is what, even before the Mongols, exposed Europe to a lot of the things that the Islamic Golden Age was accomplishing, right? War is not always the best way to learn about another culture. You could just knock on the door and say, hello, would you like to teach me about your culture? I'll teach you about mine. But it does work out that way. Zheng He is an example where it's not happening by war, although they were being a little aggressive with those ships. But the Crusades leads to, right, contact with the Muslim world, but not even just the Muslim world. Sometimes we discount the Byzantine world. By contacting the Byzantine Empire, which was still, mostly thriving, at least better than Western Europe at the time, had a lot of access to Greek and Roman culture and knowledge and scripture and texts, but then especially going into the Middle East. And then also, this is not on here, but you can connect it on, connection with Spain. Spain never gets enough credit. Spain was part of the Islamic Golden Age, right? It was a Muslim country for roughly 800 years. City of Cordoba was considered one of the two great lights, right? The city of Cordoba and Baghdad. Baghdad in Iraq and Cordoba in Spain were centers of learning and culture, and the Europeans were also learning from their fellow European Muslims in Spain, and getting information out from them. So between the Byzantine Empire, Spain, and the Middle East from the Crusades, there's a lot of knowledge coming out. And of course, the northern Spanish Catholics are fighting wars against the Muslims in the south. But again, even with war, there's going to be cultural exchange, although not my recommended method of learning about other people's culture. And then, we have, in particular, I don't know if we're talking about the Golden Age elsewhere, or if we have already, but key things from the Islamic Golden Age, if you only remember like two things, the number one thing is the numbers. Because man, you just can't, I know I'm not a math guy, Mr. Fox hopefully would appreciate this, you really can't do without these numbers, man. Started from India, right? We go up to Empire, we talked about the Hindu numerals, right? It's a decimal, base 10 decimal system, the function of the zero, right? As a specific value of zero and a placeholder in the base 10 system. We got the ones column, a tens column, a hundreds column, a thousands column. You can do math that you can't do with things like Roman numerals, right? Or using alpha, beta, gamma, delta as letters, right? Like they used to do. You need this, and that's going to make its way to the Muslim world. You have people like Al-Khwarizmi, right? Who basically developed algebra, right? And that's going to make its way through the Crusades and through other forms of cultural diffusion into Europe, and you'll get the numbers that we have today, which we call Arabic numerals, which are rightly called Hindu or Arabic numerals, or Indian Arabic numerals. And also Greek philosophy. Access to Greek philosophy in the Islamic world then led to that being developed further from a Muslim perspective, an Islamic perspective, which is monotheistic, right? And then that spread back into Europe, but now Europe is Christian, 1,000 years later, and they're sure appreciative that somebody did all the hard work for them of adapting pagan, essentially, or at least from a pagan environment, Greek and Roman philosophy to a monotheistic point of view, right? They didn't have to do all that work because the Muslims had already done it. And the topic of technology, there's so much more we can mention, architecture and technology, the development of early camera technology, early flight technology, but a lot of that is going to be passed on. Zheng He, the Chinese explorer, we often see him grouped in with Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, but he's grouped separately here, and I do think that he is kind of the odd one out because he's not an explorer for exploration's sake. He is a government, to be fair, Marco Polo was a Chinese government employee as well, but Zheng He works for the Chinese government, and he is on trade missions and tribute missions. And one of the reasons that they went on these missions was because they were trying to show off. Because the Mongols had conquered China under the Yuan dynasty, and now under the Ming dynasty, they're trying to show that China is back, and they want to really show how strong they are. So they went around and went on trade missions mostly throughout the Indian Ocean world. You can see where he went, right? It's basically throughout Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, East Africa, to show off the power of the Chinese military, the Chinese ships. An enormous fleet of junks, Junks. I think we did talk about junks the other day, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that they were so much bigger allowed them to create cultural transfers, and that's something we connect in this way as well. So again, we're seeing that repetition, but connecting in different ways those same concepts. Here's a beautiful map Freemanpedia. You guys know in the review videos, right, that you've been doing, he always like makes a shout out to two websites,
Yeah.
Freemanpedia and AP Wiki. What is it?
Worldopedia.
AP Worldopedia. Yeah, they're really good. There's AP Worldopedia. I think you guys will like better. It goes like perfectly with this. Although there are some blank spots. There's some parts where there's just nothing there. You're like, oh, where's 3.3? It's nothing. But the ones that he does have are really nice. It's very my kind of style, what I would like in terms of just summarizing the information. So if you're ever going through these and you think, oh, I feel like part of this was a little bit thin, or maybe there's something I didn't understand, you can go back to that, just click through them and skim around, as opposed to the videos that you guys have been watching. And the secondary videos, which is great if you like to listen, but if you want to just read and you're just like, let me see the text somewhere, that's a really good one. Freemanpedia is mostly graphics like this, so it's not like text, it's just maps and pictures and things. So if you're more of a visual person and you like to see it, blocked out for you in like charts and graphs like this, this is all Freemanpedia stuff. Sound good? So I really do encourage you guys to check those resources out, especially over break as you're kind of crunching and cramming. And this is everything we just talked about, right? So if you just saw this, without everything I just said, you wouldn't have it all, but you'd have an idea. Al-Andalus, hey, look, they give credit to Spain. Remember, Islamic Spain is Al-Andalus. Andalus. They named it after the Vandals, but they didn't have V's in Arabic. So they didn't pronounce it. The Vandals briefly ruled Spain. So let's get into our 3.3. Changes in trade networks resulted from stimulated increasing productive capacity with important implications for social and gender structures and environmental processes. So I'm gonna lean heavily on the Freemanpedia stuff because I think that it's a nice way of breaking it down. Especially for some of the ones that I don't have as much specific to say on, at least you have this. So chinampas, waru, and terracing, all things from the Americas that we already talked about, right?
Yep.
And I'm basing this on you as my main person. You're the only person I think now that has not missed a single review session. So props to you. I should get you a little award or medal or something. Yes, guys, round of applause for your boy DR. That is a weak applause, man. Can we do that again? Can we try that again? Come on. Some encouragement. Yeah, all right. That's better. Yeah, everyone knows exactly how many people are here today. So chinampas, right? Just real quick as a review, floating islands, right? In the Aztec Empire, they used these as a way of building out some form of land reclamation into the lake, Lake Texcoco, where Tenochtitlan was built in the center of, and they built these floating islands that are still being used in some places or being reintroduced. And this is the city of Tenochtitlan, so you can see surrounding it are these chinampas as part of the system within the center of this lake. And that's a way of irrigating as well as making use of bringing land. Waru is, oh sorry, put Waru in there? We looked at Waru the other day though. It's in this one. It's a very similar kind of structure, but it's like the opposite. Rather than putting land on water, you're putting water on land. So you're digging trenches, these canals, these channels, to bring water in. And like we said last time, it protects from rain, floods, like washing away everything because they follow the channels rather than where the land is, where the crops are, and the water is absorbed up from the bottom, right? In addition to you pour it on top too, but it's being absorbed from the bottom, so it keeps everything really hydrated. Terracing, we see this definitely in Peru and in the Inca Empire, but we also see it in China and elsewhere in Asia as a form of dealing with a steep incline, right? We said this last time. Having those terraces, having those steps. Step farming is another way it's sometimes described. I doubt you'll ever see that on the AP. They love the word terrace because step is too simple and everything has to have a more complicated way of saying it, right? That's what AP is all about, being unnecessarily complicated. The College Board has been watching. I'd be very insulted. But we also see it in China for farming as well because there's a lot of hills and mountains in China, and so they do this terracing that allows for water to come down evenly on each level without it washing things away. It can kind of catch the water, without, and you can see it in this one. This is the reflective because this is full of water, right? That's not snow or anything. The water, that's the reflection from the sky on the water. It's caught in the thing, so as it pours down, it catches the water and it prevents it from being eroded. Now this one we didn't talk about at all yet, right? In the Middle Ages, now this is going to get, because I'm a little bit, I find it a little bit weird the way this is organized, even from the AP's perspective, on the next page. So this is going to lead into that, but I guess we'll just go with it and see how it goes. So during the early Middle Ages in Europe, right? Not the early Middle Ages, the Middle Ages? 900s, 1000s and stuff. There's some improvements being made with agriculture. There's some new techniques and some new technologies. Now, when I talked about this in class last year, it was in the context of post-Crusades, and we were looking at the ways that the Crusades influenced Europe to kind of come back to life and start thriving again after this Middle Ages. And then we looked at the things that had nothing to do with the Crusades. This is one of the things that had nothing to do with the Crusades. It was just technologies and techniques that made farming better in Europe. So one thing is the wooden plow versus the iron plow, right? They developed, so for the Mediterranean, right, it's fine to use wood because the earth is softer, it's lighter, you can plow with a wooden plow. But up in Northern Europe where it's colder, when they tried to apply those Roman techniques to farming, the wood, it's just not strong enough to cut through that harder earth, that more frozen earth. So they developed the iron plow, and that made it more accessible. And they also developed a new system of harnesses and straps and collars that goes onto the horse to attach that plow so that you can use the horses to pull the plow, right? And horses work better than an ox. You can get a lot of strength from the animal. Again, who doesn't have this?
Americans.
Yeah. So this is just, something that's holding the Americans back, right? But in Europe, they're going to use this plow with the horses, and that's going to increase the amount of land they can cultivate and how effectively, how efficiently they can do that. They also had the 3-field system. What they used to do was they had a 2-field system, where half the land, if you farm the same land over and over and over again, what happens?
Nutrients go away.
Yeah, what do you need? You need Norman, right? Norman B. Your boy, right? Who am I talking about? Green Revolution, right? We throw a little fertilizer on there, we don't have to worry about all this stuff. We start time with organic farming methods. Who needs them, right? Just throw a bunch of pesticides and fertilizer, you get the whole thing going. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Genetically modified lemons. But what they used to do was they would have, because they don't want to deplete the land of nutrients, they would take half their land and farm it, and half the land leave it barren, leave it empty, right? But that's a real waste. You have all this land, and you can only use half of it at a time, right? So they would switch every other year to let the land kind of regain its nutrients, so they wouldn't wear it out. But since that's very inefficient, they said, is there something else we could maybe do? So they developed the 3-field system, where they divide it into 3. One is for your main crop, like wheat or barley, right? Your staple grain. One is left empty, and one is legumes. Everybody's favorite: beans, peas, black-eyed peas, whatever you want. They actually add nitrogen to the soil, which is what artificial fertilizers are trying to do, right? So when you plant beans, it adds nitrogen to the soil, so it actually creates fertilizer, a natural form of fertilization into that land. And what else can you do with beans? You can eat them, and it's a great source of protein. Yeah, particularly nutrients in general, but particularly protein, and especially when people don't have very varied diets, that's going to be very welcome, right? So that helps increase the amount of crops that can be yielded, and that leads to a lot of the improvements in Europe in the later part of the Middle Ages, which of course then gets knocked down by the Black Death, but then they make it come back in the Renaissance, right? I have really nothing to say about swamp draining. It's another way of getting access to land that otherwise wouldn't be accessible. You guys were just talking about the Green Revolution. One of the downsides is when you do this is you take land that had another ecological purpose and you repurpose it for farming. You can't make the whole world a farm. There's other things that need to exist. There need to be forests. There need to be swamps. Some for somebody, right? So there are downsides to that, but they can drain the swamp by basically piping out the water, and then that land can be used for farming.
Doesn't he say drain the swamp?
I guess we can, Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Drain the swamp. We're going to drain the whole swamp.
Doesn't he say
There'll
that?
be no frogs, no mosquitoes. Yeah, he does. It's a reference to
Shrek.
to Shrek? I don't think so. It's a reference to getting rid of the swamp creatures, I guess.
Turn the frogs gay.
Huh?
Turn the frogs.
Oh god, that's a whole other thing. Now we're gonna put that on the internet. For getting rid of corruption in government. I don't know how effective. It's more of a slogan than a real policy proposal, but I'm not gonna.
He's a little crazy.
I'm not gonna go too far with this.
I'll
What was, in the homework, what did you say? If the good historians do what with their biases?
I mean,
They acknowledge them.
Without pushing them. Let's try to find that right balance where I can. So there we go. Horse collar. This is the kind of stuff again you can see on Freemanpedia. These kind of charts that can you need just like what? No, Mike. Oh, this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. Now, going into the next page, because I'm going to skip over B, because I think it says it all there, and you have the picture there, taking up all your writing space anyway. I don't love the way this is organized, but I'm going to try to make sense of it for you, because if we look at A and we look at B, it kind of goes like A, B, A. Okay? You guys hear what I said? So look at what A says, right? Just on the left, it says multiple factors contributed to the decline of urban areas in this period, including invasions, disease, and the decline of agricultural productivity. So what are they talking about here? What do you think they're referring to? What are they hinting at? From period 3, what things does that make you think of? Decline of urban areas, invasions, disease.
Black Death.
Those are the two I thought of, right? Mongols and Black Death, right? And yet, this is happening before this. So there's another time where this is happening right at the beginning of this period. What's that?
Bubonic plague.
That's at the end. That's toward the end, right? That's in the 1300s. But at the very beginning of this period, right? Really not even in this period, but leading into this period, at the end of the classical
Like the
period.
little ice age.
Huh?
I have no idea.
So when we talk about the transition from the classical to the post-classical, from period 2 to period 3, we have two big empires that fall. Which are those? China, the Han, and Roman, right? And there's invasions, there's disease that lead to that. So I don't know what the AP's original intention was in this. I think this applies to both. Personally, I think you guys have it right with the Mongols and the Black Death. But the way it's put out in here, and the way that a lot of other sites and stuff who analyze this go, they talk about it in the context of the decline of the classical empires, which really happens before it's all done by 600. It's something that happens 200s, 300s, 400s, 500s, right, guys? So I don't know why they put it that way, unless all these websites are misinterpreting it and everyone's just following that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it from the end of the classical period version of that. Then we'll go to B, where that's, I think that's the ordering that's confusing too, because B says multiple factors contributed to urban revival, so cities coming back, including the end of invasions, the ability of safe and reliable transport, and the rise of commerce and warmer temperatures between specific dates, between 800 and 1300. An increase in agricultural productivity and subsequent rising in population, greater availability of labor. So particularly those dates, 800 to 1300, that's not talking about cities coming back and labor coming back after the Black Death or after the Mongols. That's before all that, right? So that would be after the collapse of the classical empires, after the Dark Ages, the darkest part of the early Middle Ages, right? But really we see kind of two waves of this happening in this period. We have the fall of Rome, the fall of the Han, disease, spread, all these problems. Then we start to see during the Middle Ages, around the time of the Crusades, Europe starts to improve, things starting to get better. Then the Black Death and the Mongols happen and things get bad again. And then after we emerge from that, we have the Renaissance, right? So we have two waves of that. We have bad, good, bad, good. Now, this whole temperature thing plays a role in both of it. Now, this is a mistake, not from the AP, but from this chart, and also from one of the websites, either Freemanpedia or AP Wikipedia, or AP Worldopedia, made this mistake. This is the Little Ice Age. A lot of people don't know what the Little Ice Age is, and they mistake it for something else, okay? So look at Little Ice Age. This does not have to do with the period before 800, okay? There's warming periods and there's cool periods, okay? During the Roman times, there was if you want to write this under, maybe you can just put it with Little Ice Age, just maybe, you don't have to cross out Little Ice Age, but like, we're going to talk about more than just Little Ice Age. We're going to talk about the whole temperature issue, global temperature issue. So during the Roman period, right, they call it the Roman warm period, right? During the Roman Empire. Things are going well in Rome. The temperature is warmer, especially for places like Europe. A slight increase in global temperatures is a positive thing, right? We've seen things like this more extreme going way back to the Natufians, right? We talked about the Younger Dryas. Remember that? When we started the agriculture, because it got really nice and everybody ate pistachios and antelopes, and then everything got cold and everybody decided to start farming because they had nothing else to eat, right? But in this period, starting from period 2, you have the Roman warm period, right? Write that down. The Roman warm period, and then you have a cooling period after the decline of the Roman Empire. So a lot of people point to this as, one of the factors in the end of the classical civilizations. Because when things get cooler, less people have access to resources and agriculture and things like that, and so people get desperate, they invade each other, right? That has an impact on humans, everything else, right? The environment's impact on us. So you have a cooling period going up until around 800. And then around 800, it gets warmer. You see? And from around 800 to around 1,000, going into 1100, things start doing a lot better in a lot of parts of the world, not just Europe, right? Europe is still in the Middle Ages. It's still, still medieval Europe. But they're doing better. Like we saw the improvements in agriculture, right? This is going to play a role in that too. It's not just new techniques, but it's the advantage of a better temperature. This is when we're starting to see the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age. Tang Dynasty is during this warmer period, right? They call this the medieval warm period. Is that on here? No, it's not, but it does say warmer temperatures on B, right? It says warmer temperatures between 800 and 11 and 1300. If you want to just underline that and write on the margin, medieval warm period, right? So the Little Ice Age is after the medieval warm period, not before. Yes, it's true the temperature was lower in the world during the early Middle Ages, but that's not called the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age is later. The Little Ice Age is after 1300, okay? It's around the same time as the Black Death, if you want to associate it with that. And it stays pretty cool. Look at the warm period. Look how warm it got, right? Until the 1850s, right? So the Little Ice Age lasts in part until the 1850s. There's theories as to why this happened, and there's a lot of different ones, and of course there's just environmental reasons, geological reasons, volcanoes, just natural fluctuations in temperature. But the one that I find the most fascinating in this period that some call the Anthropocene, the age of humans, is what happened in the 1300s. We just said a lot of people died.
Yeah, Black Death.
Black Death. And then what happened in the 1500s? A lot of people died. No. A lot of people died. Even more than the Black Death. 1500s? What happened in 1492?
Columbus filled over.
And what happened for like another 100 years after that? The diseases in the Americas, right? Now that's going into period 4, right? That's going into period 4, right? But with the Black Death and the massive epidemics of smallpox and measles that hits, and other things, right, that hit the Americas, the massive death on a global scale over the course of a couple hundred years is one theory for why the temperature dropped. There were less humans. In fact, even this cooling period, there's some theories that disease played a role, because there was, and if you want to put this for A, I don't know where, because the some of the pieces are a little bit weird with just putting the Little Ice Age. You had the Antonine Plague during the Roman Empire, in the 3rd century, the 200s, and then you had the Plague of Justinian, which we don't know what it was, but it may have been smallpox or measles. Or possibly with bubonic plague. No, smallpox or measles was the Antonine Plague. The Justinian's plague was bubonic plague. I'm almost certain. So you had plagues then as well that led to a decrease in population. But by the way, look where we're at.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So as much warmer as it got during the medieval period, this is where we are now. So you can see when we talk about climate change, like in context, like pretty extreme. And then we go, oh, what's the matter? What's 1 degree Celsius? And you go, well, it hasn't even fluctuated that much in the last 2,000 years. That's a pretty big deal. The environment is a gentle and delicate balance.
ice caps freezing now? Isn't there's like a study that shows that ice caps are freezing now.
I think one pole was freezing more and one was melting more, right?
I think so, yeah. I remember that.
Like the north is maybe freezing more, but the south is melting more or something like that. I forgot. I read about that, but I'm certainly not going to put myself forward as an expert by any means. So guys, when we talk, so you under diseases, right? You put that down, Antonine and Justinian's plague for the early part of it, and for the later part, the bubonic Black Death, right? So invasions so look right here, right? You have this they're thinking of it in that context. But again, Little Ice Age, this is wrong. It's later. And then they're saying end of invasion, state for trade. So that's not really accurate. So Antonine Plague, in terms of invasions, for A, you can put down the in the earlier period, going at the end of the Classical Age, you have the Germanic tribes, the Huns, the Xiongnu in China, which is basically the Huns. There we go, there's our Xiongnu in China. But you have later on the Mongols, right? So if you, I don't know how you want to draw it on here, but you can put it's like A1, B, and then A2. You know, if you want to split your invasions, your diseases and stuff between A1 and A2. Little Ice Age is A2. It's after B, right? And instead of a Little Ice Age before that, you had a cooling period that wasn't a Little Ice Age. It wasn't called Little Ice Age. Oh, it's also not an Ice Age. It's just a cool period, but they make names of that. Now let's go for that middle period of B, where things are getting better, right? So it is the medieval warm period, right? You have trade increasing because of all that improvements in agriculture, because agriculture is more productive. You have safe, reliable transport. So this is rising commerce temperature. We talked about that warm period. Increased agriculture. Safe and reliable transport too, in terms of so one thing that's there's more than one thing you can talk about for this, but ironically, the invasions that we talked about up there also lead to safe and reliable transport, because it says end of invasions, but it really depends on where you are, right? Because what's this big empire that invaded everyone?
The Mongols.
And then what did that create?
Pax Mongolia.
Yeah, so invasion leads to peaceful communication and mobility and transportation, and because when an empire rules over an entire area, they are able to create a peaceful environment for people to move, just like we saw in the Pax Romana. Greater availability of labor becomes true as populations increase, right? Because if there's increased agriculture, if there's more surplus, then what happens? More population, more people, right? More urbanization, more people moving to cities. And then that leads to more people looking for jobs that are not farming, which is what?
Job specialization.
Job specialization, right? So that you just turn up the knob on all of those things. Ironically, when the Black Death happens, you have a decrease in the availability of labor, which in the short term can be a negative because you need people to do the jobs and you don't have them. But then the positive side of that is when you have a decrease in labor, what do you have more of?
Jobs.
More jobs, which in one sense is bad because we need people to do these jobs and it's important that they get done so society can function. But who's it good for?
People who are not.
Because
They have jobs.
yeah, they are people who are job hunting. Oh man, how am I gonna find a job around here, man? All the jobs are taken, and then half people die. You go, look, wow, looks like my Monster.com, is blown up, man. I'm getting lots of hits on my LinkedIn, I don't do a lot of this stuff. So that's going to create opportunities for people, and that helps peasants and lower class people to have more social mobility because they have opportunities to demand more from their jobs. Let's jump ahead to Roman numeral 3. Diversification of labor organization began with the settled agriculture continued in this period. So we were just talking about specialization of labor, right? Forms of labor organization include free peasant agriculture, nomadic pastoralism, craft production, and guild organization, various forms of coerced and unfree labor, government-imposed labor, and military obligations. So they're giving you more like definitions here without connecting to the time period or what happened. Okay, feel better. Maybe it's because you're drinking a cup full of sugar. What is that?
No, I got
What is it called?
It's what is it? Mango dragon fruit with lemonade.
Mango dragon fruit with lemonade. Is it very sweet?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably why. When you're eating, like, shoveling sugar into your system, it's probably going to feel a little queasy. So, we have a lot here. Peasant labor, if you want to put under peasant labor, tenant farmers, because we know that, so this says peasant labor, but you should add the word free before peasant labor, because that's what it says in the bullet point, in A. And that should be distinguished from coerced labor, right? So even though if you want to, you can even draw an arrow from coerced labor up to peasant labor, where you write serfdom, right? So under peasant labor, you can write tenant farmers, and you can write serfdom. So tenant farmers are people who are going to work on farms, and they don't, they're not forced to work there. They're not bound to the land like serfs. For serfdom, they're bound to the land. They are required to live there. They're required to stay there, and they owe like a debt. It's more than corvée labor, right? It's more than just I'm paying a tax to the state. It's you're not allowed to go anywhere. You're not free. You're stuck here, and you owe your life kind of to the Lord. You're not considered slaves. You're not considered property, but you don't have total freedom, right? So you can write that under coerced labor or peasant labor, but whichever one you draw it on, it's coerced peasant labor. So connected to both. Tenant farmers have more freedom because they are tenants, right? They have a landlord. They pay him rent. They use the land, and they don't owe him any crops because what they pay him is money, right? So they use the land as they see fit, and that gives them a little bit more autonomy. That gives them a little bit more financial freedom. They can go and sell crops in the market, get some money, pay what they need to pay in rent, whatever they have remaining. They can use it for themselves. So it gives them more freedom. Pastoralism, we know, right? So in the Middle Ages, we have all this. I'll get to that as well. We have the guild organization. Oh wow, you can use these beautiful slides. Is that on the last one I wanted to mention? Old cities in decline. Is that on here? Where did I want to put that? For old cities in decline, we didn't mention that on the previous page, but I was going to mention Baghdad was sacked by the Mongols and really went into decline after 1258. Poor Baghdad. They destroyed so much, man. So much of Baghdad, B-A-G-H-D-A-D, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, the capital of current capital of Iraq. Right, a lot of those cities that were established then became the capitals of the modern countries today. We talked about the Black Death. I didn't even show you these. I got too excited. Oh, look at that! Isn't that beautiful? That's why they call it Black Death, because you turn black. Your hand, your nose, feet. Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. So back to the page. Guild organizations. When we talk about guilds, right, during the Middle Ages, because you had the development of these towns that were popping up, you had more urbanization, right? Whether it's towns or cities, it's still a form of urbanization in general. They were able to create these organizations called guilds, where people who were experts in their particular field, their particular skill, or I should say trade is really the right word for it, they would teach to people who wanted to learn that trade. So you had the master, the guild master, who was an expert, who had dedicated his or her life, usually his, life to that trade. It's just being around, man. Patriarchy is no joke. Smash the picture. That's what I'm making my dog do. Yeah. And you guys, smash the picture. See, I'm revealing my biases like a true historian. Maybe I'm pushing it.
Why are you loving liberals?
Patriarchy's pretty big. I don't think I'm threatening patriarchy too much. I think the patriarchy is just fine.
He's mansplaining.
I am mansplaining. Oh man. Oh no.
Good job.
What have I done? But I'm also a teacher, so it's kind of hard for me not to. I teach explain things.
Now you're mansplaining your mansplation.
Oh no. I always take myself.
Imagine trying to get a job after this.
Yeah, bro.
Bro, that's a bro moment.
Bro, that's a bro moment. So guild organization, right? You have the master who trains his apprentice. The apprentice is there as an educational opportunity. They learn how to do that trade. Once they learn, they become a journeyman, which gives them the right to work. It's basically like graduating. But when you graduate with a degree, you're not an expert, right? You have to then work in that trade your whole life in order to become a master, right? So someone will say,